And I just want to acknowledge something. There is a cost to this. I'm not going to lie to our audience. I'm not going to lie to your audience. And I'm also not going to say if you do nothing, you're a coward. I am not saying that. What I am saying, though, is people say, what do I do? Well, that's an action step. But brave and courageous and moral things, Kirk, rarely don't come without a cost.
Charlie Kirk is the founder and the president of Turning Point USA. It's the largest and the fastest growing conservative youth activist organization in the country, and he's joining us now to discuss this. Charlie, great to see you.
Great to see you, Kirk. You're a great American. Honored to call you a friend and glad to be here.
You know, I thank you. I want to just thank you for putting my name on the backdrop behind you the way that you have so prominently. It actually looks like the Charlie and Kirk show, if you take a look.
Yes, that's right.
Should we make
co-hosts?
We could make the announcement right now to everybody.
I have the last name, you have the first name, and that's I haven't met a Kirk yet, but I'm sure someone's out there.
Hey, my son just came back from TPUSA's Student Action Summit in Florida. He was blown away. He was just set on fire. That's an amazing thing. What was your takeaway from SAS?
It was exhausting for all of us that organized it, but it was amazing, Kirk. We had over 4,000 students from all across the country in Tampa, Florida. Some of the most amazing speakers you can imagine: Kayleigh, McEnany, Governor Ron DeSantis, Mike Pompeo, Senator Ted Cruz, and more. And the team did an absolutely incredible job in their execution of the event, in the first class way that we went about doing everything. It was the largest ever young conservative gathering in American history, and that's exactly why most people don't even know what happened, because the media refused to cover it. They don't like showing that there's people that are gathering around first principles and God-granted rights and the Constitution and free speech and American exceptionalism. And so super pleased that your son had a great time, and we've been hearing lots of stories like that. Praise God.
Well, that's what I love about what you do, too, is you're not only motivating people with great speakers and cool events for young people, but you're also educating them about the things that they're often not hearing in their schools, particularly public schools for sure, but even private schools, even faith-based schools are not teaching these kinds of principles without which we don't have a republic like we do. One of those principles is religious freedoms. When I was in school as a kid, I didn't really learn much about that at all. In fact, I wasn't religious. And so for me, I didn't even really care about the subject. But to our founders, it was absolutely essential. Why is religious freedom the mother of all freedoms?
First and foremost, it's the freedom to worship your own creator, the reason why you exist. And also, the founding fathers designed this system of self-government, believing that only with a moral and religious people this was possible. It's John Adams' quote where he said, "The Constitution was written solely for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for the people of any other." And so limited government is only possible when people are able to regulate their own decisions and conduct, particularly in religious communities, or having at least the church or the worship of God as a centerpiece of your life. So this idea of liberty, the way that the founding fathers understood liberty, is not the traditional libertarian view of liberty that we've come to realize in America. It's the ability to pursue virtue without somebody getting in the way. The necessity of virtue was fundamental to the American founding. 55 out of 56 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Christians who regularly attended church. At least a dozen, Kirk, were pastors, and maybe even more.
Right.
And more than that, had religious degrees of people that went to religious institutions. State barriers and boundaries were actually the beginning and the end of certain religious traditions that had certain perspectives on which strain of Protestantism was the best and most effective way to practice Christianity. For example, Pennsylvania was heavily Quaker, right? We all know that example. And so the founding fathers were only able to articulate a doctrine of separation, were able to participate in the separation of the British people and then a creation of a new government because they understood the teachings of the Bible and they understood the moral right to religious freedom. Religious freedom in the United States Constitution is unlike anything else. It's mentioned twice in two different ways. The first is in the Establishment Clause, and the second is in the Free Expression Clause. The Establishment Clause is that Congress shall make no religion. And this was actually not that religion has no place in government, but it was a promise to every single strain of Protestant tradition in the colonial times that it was not going to become an Anglican or Episcopalian or Quaker or Presbyterian or Lutheran country, that every single denomination would be respected. The Free Expression Clause is the most important, though, that the government has no right to get in the way of your religious conscience, your ability to gather, to assemble, and to be able to worship your Creator. This is a unique attribute and characteristic of the American system. And as soon as you lose religious freedom, state control then begins to set in.
You know, you said something earlier on in that answer where you said that the only reason we're able to handle freedom in America is because people have understood the value of self-government. And really what that is the pursuit of virtue. But how does that relate to being religious, right? Were the founders just saying, well, we just prefer that people are religious, and yeah, a lot of us were pastors and ministers, but someone might say, wait, Charlie, are you implying that in order to be virtuous, you've got to have a religious root in there? Is it really that important, or can't we just be atheists and be good?
Yeah, I'm sure there's good atheists. I get this question a lot. There's a lot of good atheists out there. They're good because they're practicing the Judeo-Christian ethic. They just don't want to admit it. The question is, what is the good?
If we practice the Darwinian ethic, I could end up eating my neighbor because I'm fitter and I'm surviving.
Precisely. That's right. And so the question is, what is good? I always ask young people, I say, well, what do you mean I can't be a good atheist? I said, you could be a good atheist. I've never said that. Where do you get this definition of good from? What is right? What is transcendent? What is evil? These are really big questions. And thankfully we have an amazing tradition in the Christian world of what all these things mean. It's good to try to grow closer to your Creator. It's good to defend the innocent. It's good to tell the truth. It's evil to call good evil and evil good. It's evil to turn your back on those that can't defend themselves. It's evil to disobey your parents. It's evil to take another life. We take this for granted because it's kind of been meshed into the DNA of Western culture.
Right.
And it's not normative to the human experience. So to answer your question, freedom is not sustainable if you remove religion. And I'll be even more specific. Freedom is not sustainable if you remove Christianity. Eventually it will implode. Eventually you will be ruled simply by your senses. You'll be ruled simply by your consciousness.
That's
I'm
right.
a big lover of reason. I think reason is a gift from the Lord. It says in Isaiah 1, let us reason together. But reason without revelation, reason without the belief in a transcendent order will go exactly where you articulated it, Kirk.
Yep.
It will go to where John Stuart Mill or where Darwin articulated, which is the survival of the fittest, a eugenicist type experiment, and we as Christians should reject that.
Charlie, just lastly, before we go away to a break, this idea of the separation of church and state still seems to come up. Even though it's not in the Constitution, it's not in the Bill of Rights, there's a principle there that people get entirely backwards and upside down thinking that that is the reason why we shouldn't talk about God or faith in the government. Is that true?
No, I mean, it's in a single letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Convention. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Declaration. It's not in the Bill of Rights. It's not in the Federalist Papers. It's not in any of those foundational documents that really formed this republic that we have. It was adopted by the Warren Burger Court in the 1960s and 70s as a reason to get prayer out of schools. But let's pretend they were right, Kirk. Let's pretend that they were right for a second, even though they're not. Then why don't they keep the state out of the church? Why don't they keep the public health officials from going into churches and locking them down? I thought they want separation of church and state. They can't even be consistent with their own lies.
Right.
Even if they were right, Kirk, this last year with the lockdowns, no church would have been forced to close. No church would be facing fines like Mike McClure at Calvary Chapel, San Jose.
Yeah.
In fact, they've never believed that. The only thing they believed is that the state can do whatever you want. The church should not try to influence the state. This is rubbish. The founding fathers always believed that Christians deserved to be counselors to the king. Not deserved. They needed to be counselors to the king. The people whispering in the ear of the leaders, counseling them, do this and don't do that. The church has abdicated its moral place to be counseling the king or counseling the political leaders in our country, and we see the result of that.
That is so true, because I think religion is inescapable for us as human beings and as a culture. And if we kick God off of the throne, we can't really do that. But in our minds, if we want to play make-believe and think we can do that, that creates a vacuum. And then we, as a man, a group of people, corporately as a state, will assume the position of the God of our culture, the supreme dictator from which all authority flows, all laws flow, and then we end up bowing down to a totalitarian government, which you're doing such a fantastic job of keeping from happening in the minds of young people, and I thank you. Charlie, after this break, we're going to talk a little bit more, you and me and everyone watching, about what we can do about this ourselves, as parents, as grandparents. How can we practice and protect religious freedoms? Coming up next. We'll get right to the interview, but first, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap that bell icon so you never miss a video. Now back to the interview. Welcome back, everybody. Charlie, let's get practical. I want to talk about how you and me and the people that are watching can practically do something to practice religious freedom, because if we don't practice it, it's going to go away, and how we can protect it from those who are taking it away from us. What are you personally doing? I mean, I know you've got TPUSA organizationally, you've got SAS, these fantastic, amazing events for young people, but I've seen you in some TikTok and YouTube videos where you're actually speaking at school board meetings or at city council meetings. Yes. I can't remember which one, but talk about some of these boots on the ground, everyday things that you're doing that other people can do too.
Yes, I mean, everyone should be showing up to school board meetings all across the country. We're going to be showing up to the Scottsdale Unified School District meeting, whenever it is, if they allow us to, because they keep going mobily and virtually, because they're afraid to actually face the citizens. I'm a taxpayer in Scottsdale, and they are doing some really sinister stuff. Let me tell you what, Kirk. And I'm not going to put up with it. I went to the Chandler Unified School District, also a payer of income tax in Arizona, so showed up there. We have to be active, be involved, and show up at all these meetings, Kirk. The other thing is this, though, is that people say, what do I do? What do I do? I ask them, are you the same person publicly that you are privately? That's the most important thing that you just have to do. No more disguising yourself when you leave your home. No more that you got to put on the jersey of being kind of this like secular liberal when you're at work. No. You are living under the tyranny of other pressure. Yes, you might lose your job. Yes, you might lose your friends. But the moment that you have to now pretend to be somebody you're not in social situations, then they've won. The minute that breaks, then all of a sudden they're going to start to lose. Their power is in their ability to make us to conform. I believe it's Romans 8:12 or Romans 12:8. This is how I kind of get the numbers screwed up at times. Do not conform to the ways of this world. It is a biblical teaching to not conform to the ways of this world. Yet so often, Kirk, the number one piece of feedback I get on our program here on our podcast, and you've been on our podcast before, Kirk, I'd love to have everyone check it out, is that they tell us, Charlie, I'm afraid I will lose this. And I say, that fear is a tactic used by the enemy to silence truth.
Right.
And that fear is understandable. But if you succumb to that fear, then all of a sudden you are playing into the greatest weapon used by the opposition.
So who are the biggest thieves? Where should we be looking to say, okay, that's an area where they're looking to strip me of my religious freedoms and my ability to be who I am privately when I'm in public?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest is forcible jobs, forcing you to lose your job, mockery, ridicule, isolation, if you have a different view. And the biggest thing is this, is that if you get a knot in your stomach because you're afraid to speak out at a friend's house about a political matter or a social matter or a religious matter, that's the testing point. If you get a knot in your stomach at work about that, and look, I'm not going to counsel you to be brash. You have to have prudence. You have to have practical judgment when you do these things. You shouldn't just rush into it and just start screaming at your work that vaccines are like, I don't want to take the vaccine or whatever, right? That's not what I'm saying, because some people are doing that, and that's not wise. What I am saying, though, is when asked or pressured or prodded, don't lie. Tell the truth. Tell the truth in every single thing. I can tell you this. People say, Charlie, how are you able to do what you do? It's so simple. I say the exact same things privately to our production meeting of our podcast that I say on the show. That's the secret to our success. There is no separation here. And my team is laughing because they're like, yep, that's right. There's no camouflaging. There's no disguising. There's no poll testing. What is true, this is what I'm going to say. I encourage other people to do that. And by the way, it's not easy, but it's so liberating, Kirk. It's so beautiful. You never have to worry about being restrained to another, looking around your shoulder, the cost of speaking your mind. It's freedom that truly comes from the Lord.
Well, I agree. And as an actor, I have made my living being somebody publicly that I am not privately, right? That's what we do for a living. And so we get really good at it. And so for me, I've got to unlearn what has become so natural. Yes. And most of us know that this is going to come at some kind of a cost. Like you said, losing your job is a big deal for someone who doesn't have a big social media platform to be able to get other ways of getting their message out, other ways of monetizing all the good work that they're doing. And so understandably, it's like, well, what do I do? But if we all do it, and if we join together voluntary unions and we begin to associate with one another, we can then begin rebuilding the systems and the institutions, which is what we should have been doing from the beginning, rather than relying on platforms built by people who want to destroy our message, right? That would be like Jesus trying to depend on the Pharisees to disseminate his gospel to Israel. You'd be like, well, of course they're not going to want to do that. And so he created his own discipleship program and sending them out, right? And that's what we need to begin doing. And I see people are doing it because we have no choice now. I love it.
Yeah, that's right, Kirk. And I just want to acknowledge something. There is a cost to this. I'm not going to lie to our audience. I'm not going to lie to your audience. And I'm also not going to say if you do nothing, you're a coward. I am not saying that. A lot of people have different pressures and may have different decisions to make, bills to pay, children to take care of.
That's right.
So I'm not doing this. I'm not saying you're a bad person. What I am saying, though, is people say, what do I do? Well, that's an action step. But brave and courageous and moral things, Kirk, rarely don't come without a cost.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
I mean,
right.
think about that. People want the glory. They want the valor. They want the recognition, but they don't want to have to go through the cost to do that.
That's right.
And what I'm just trying to be honest with people is, if you want to do something meaningful, then you have to be willing to sacrifice for that something.
What are some things that encourage you, that you see other young people doing in America right now? Are there some examples that you can share? Like, okay, let me tell you what some of these guys did.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of young people start to run for office. I'm seeing a lot of young people get involved in their local school boards, participate in FOIA's, Freedom of Information Act requests to actually get documents from their school boards. I'm seeing a ton of movement, Kirk, that is really giving me hope and promise. I'm seeing parents start to rise up. But do you know what gives me the most amount of hope? Is how true I know our message is. That's what gives me hope.
Yeah.
And as long as we have people keep on repeating things that are true, it says in the scriptures, Philippians 4:8, whatever is true, whatever is good, ponder on these things, defend these things. If you go back to the Greek, it is to take care of these things, to nurture them. Then that's what we got to do. And look, Jesus Christ, logos, which means reason, truth. There's a lot of different ways to describe the word logos in the New Testament that's spoke about in the book of John. But Jesus was truth. He didn't just say true things. He was the embodiment of truth. And if I'm going to be honest, we as Christians have gotten away from our commitment to always telling the truth all the time. And it's not to say that people tell lies a lot. It's that they're living a lie. It's that they have to go pretend to go put on some costume and jersey at school or work and to be someone that they aren't. That's the same thing as telling a lie, by the way, Kirk. That's the same thing as saying that black is actually white and white is actually black. When you have to go to school and you're like, well, what do you think about this, Johnny? Oh, I think that that there is no God, and I don't know. Next question. That's just as bad, Kirk, is living out something you don't believe. So my call to action is that courage is only moral when it's rooted in truth. If we have the truth, we have to act on it, and that's when things are going to start to change.
I love that. I love that. When I think of how courageous you are, when I think of how courageous pastors are, like Rob McCoy and Jack Hibbs and others, and I think of so many people who spoke at the SAS meetings, we look at that and I go, man, how do you get that kind of courage? And I think what you said is exactly right, is that we have the truth on our side. For crying out loud, there is a God in heaven who governs in the affairs of men, and he's a God of justice and truth. Now, that could go bad for us if we're actually doing bad things and our nation comes under a time of judgment. But if our cause is just, he's going to make that shine. He's behind us. He's the wind in the sails for truth to push us to the finish line. And that makes me excited. And then I also think about the flip side, and I think, man, if we don't stand up with courage and we just back down as cowards, history tells me where our republic will go. And I can't believe anybody wants to go there, and I think the people don't. No one wants to live in totalitarian countries where they have no freedom, except the people that are running the joint. It's great for them because they have all the freedom.
Yes.
And they're for freedom too, actually, just their own freedom to do anything that they want and use the people as pawns and tools to advance their own kingdom with them as gods. So it's both. We have a lot at stake. Let me ask you this one final question. If we could bring back the value for religious freedom, and we could re-enshrine it and celebrate it and defend it all across this nation, what would be the positive effects that we would begin to see culturally?
Yeah, we would see a revival, and we would see people start to put God first, which is what we need to do. We need to try to recreate a transcendent order. We need to try to recreate this idea of a properly ordered hierarchy. And that's the true thing that we need to have right now. And look, religious freedom is under attack in a very scary way in our country and in our nation. It's only going to change when the faithful start to commit to freedom. The most important thing you could do in your life is give your life to Jesus Christ. The second most important thing is make sure you could do the first thing.
Give your life to Jesus Christ. Second thing, make sure that you have the freedom to do that. Charlie, why should non-religious people care about religious freedom? If they say, not my issue, you deal with it, why are they making a big mistake?
Yeah, they're wrong, because the church is all that is preventing totalitarianism from setting in.
Exactly.
If you're enjoying the surpluses of the fruit of the American system, the church and religious freedom is what keeps this entire society ordered together. You're starting to see this disintegrate. Even secular people that I know, they don't want to live in secular places anymore. Do you notice that?
Right.
Secular people I know don't want to live in New York anymore. They don't want to live in LA anymore. They're like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to Texas. I wonder why you're going to Texas. Is it that because they've actually honored religious liberty and freedom for longer? Oh, I want to go to Arizona. I wonder why. Why aren't you moving to Portland? Like, why aren't you moving to Seattle?
Right.
So even the secular types, they themselves admit that cities and areas that have had more of a reverence for God and for tradition and for order and for the church are actually nicer places to live, Kirk.
Yeah.
It's actually more beautiful. And what I mean by beautiful is that which is perfected in being. Less homelessness, less vagrancy, anti-American nonsense. The economy's more robust. You're looking up for the fellow neighbor. Crime is down. All these things just kind of fall into place, kind of mysteriously, not so mysteriously actually for the secular folks out there, when you actually have religious freedom that is preserved and protected. And you could see this. I joke around with some of my secular friends. Like, oh, I'm moving out of Boston. I'm moving out of New York. It's the worst place ever. I'm like, where are you going? Tennessee. I'm like, oh, really? I wonder, 10 years ago, the secular types were making fun of Tennessee because it was the Bible Belt in the southern part of America. Now all of a sudden it's super desirable. I wonder why. I wonder why they have their act together. It's because they've put God first. Now they're losing that in some sense, but still there's this remnant of a society that was created by the Christian ethic that even secular types want to live under. All people should care about religious freedom if you care about the well-being of humanity.
That's right. That's right, and I know that Benjamin Franklin understood that, and some of our founders who were more irreligious than others, or less religious, I should say, they understood that Christianity was the ground that they were standing on in order to keep their beliefs without being persecuted for them. And so I think, man, if you've got a freaky flag to fly, America's the place to fly it. Try to go fly that flag in another country in the Middle East. It's not going to go so well for you, yet we're advocating for similar kinds of government ultimate totalitarian rule that is going to make this country like those places. That's just insanity. Right. It's suicidal thinking.
That's right. That's exactly right, Kirk. And so if you remove the church, you remove faith, all of a sudden all this other freedom we enjoy goes away.
Hi, I'm Kirk Cameron, and thanks for watching the Kirk Cameron on TBN YouTube channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. A couple of things. Please make sure that you hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so that you're notified every time a new video is posted. And be sure to share your takeaway in the comments and invite a friend to join the conversation.
I don't agree with all of the political rhetoric out there. I don't like a lot of the political rhetoric out there. It gets too caustic. I don't like how hostile it really feels right now between the left and the right, because ultimately, whether on the left or the right, there's something that's so much more important, and it's Christ. And if we as Christians can bring gentleness to with our message, as Alan Combs said to me, don't fight fire with fire, fight fire with water. I think that's wise advice. And if we can communicate the truth with a gentle heart, it'll go a long way.
Kayleigh McEnany is co-host of Outnumbered on the Fox News channel and former White House press secretary. Now, prior to this, Kayleigh worked as a political commentator, and she got her start in media working with Mike Huckabee. Kayleigh, thanks so much for taking time to talk with me on Takeaways.
Thanks, Kirk. It's an honor to be here with you.
So I've got to ask you, because so many of us are so inspired watching you on television and seeing the convictions and the character with which you carry yourself. Did you always have an interest in politics and in the media, or was there a time when you felt this real calling to move into those places?
So it's a great question. I had this natural love for politics from a very young age. It may sound a little peculiar, but I was this 8-year-old on the playground who was doing cheers for Bob Dole during the 1996 election. I don't know what it was, but my heart just drew me to politics. And I don't come from a political family, Kirk. Yes, they have viewpoints. They are conservative. They talk about politics at the dinner table. But really, for me, it was riding my dad's truck, hearing this guy named Rush Limbaugh, and just being really inspired and motivated. So for whatever reason, God put politics on my heart from a very, very young age.
Well, it's one of those subjects that just affects everything. It's really how we live. It's the quality of life. It's how we treat other people. And faith is so closely connected with politics because that's how we live out our faith and the way that we treat other people. So that makes sense. And it seems like you have really been on the fast track. I mean, you started and you were an intern in the White House, and then you're the press secretary of the White House, and then you're a production assistant and now a national television host. That's really amazing. Tell us about your journey to the White House.
Yeah, it is. You hit the nail on the head there. I mean, from intern to press secretary in just over 10 years. I mean, it shocked me that was the plan that God had for my life, because I was just this young kid in the back corner of the briefing room watching Dana Perino do a briefing. I was in college at the time. And then I go to intern at Fox News, and then ultimately, become a host at Fox News. And it's funny, along the path, this 10-year journey to the podium, there were doors that were shut. And I used to think, why, God? I know I'm qualified for this. I know I can do this. But, every door that was shut was opening another little door that had this, kind of unlikely path to the podium, from being on a CNN set, which is where I was in 2016, to the RNC, to the Trump campaign, and then ultimately getting the call from President Trump to come be his press secretary. But, it was not an easy path. It's not a spot I glided into. It's a spot where, there were doors slammed in my face, but they were slammed for a reason. And I think when you achieve God's purpose that he has for your life, a lot of times you can look back and, like a constellation of stars, you just say, oh, that's why that was shut. Oh, that's why that door was open. Okay, now I understand. Yeah, that must have been an amazing, surreal moment. Kayleigh, the president's on the phone. He'd like to talk with you. It was surreal.
And I look back on my life, and I think many of us can say this, that We had plans for our life, and yet God opens different doors that we didn't even know were there, and closes doors that we really wish were opened. And when I think of the path that I wanted to take, I wanted to be a doctor like Ben Carson and be a surgeon, and yet God had a totally different plan. And if that hadn't happened, I never would have met my wife. We wouldn't have had our 6 kids, and I wouldn't be talking with you right now on this program. I know that you had a plan when you were at Harvard Law School to study law. And yet here you are in politics, here you are in media, you're on a national show. How did that happen? I mean, how did you go from law into politics? Did you switch and change, or was that sort of a natural progression?
It was kind of a natural progression. It's not the normal path that someone would take, but after college at Georgetown, I went right in and was a producer for Mike Huckabee. He had a show at Fox at the time, and for 3 years, I got to be there as one of his producers and learn from him and kind of get to know people at Fox. And I ultimately left to get a law degree. It's something I wanted to do to further my career, but I wanted to be in media and politics, so I went to law school with that as an end goal. But again, we talk about unlikely things happening, and it was literally during law school. I'd actually just met my husband, who I met on Twitter, which is actually pretty funny. And we were on a date, and we're baking a pizza in the oven, and I get a call from CNN. This is like during 2015, during the primaries. President Trump was there, Dr. Ben Carson, many others. And they asked me if I wanted to come in and give my opinion on what was going on. I said, sure. I had done like 1 or 2 other appearances on CNN, and this was after I had emailed more than 100 producers, my clips. So I get the call, I go in, it became more regular. I was still in law school, but on the side was doing these media appearances on CNN before ultimately getting hired. So, it's kind of like, you're on one path, law, and I knew I wanted to be in media and politics, but I didn't know how. And then you get the one call out of the blue after you've sent out, 100 plus emails.
A production assistant, an associate producer with Huckabee, and now you have your own show. How excited are you about this opportunity? I mean, is this cool? Is this a cool job? Do you love this?
Oh, I love it. I mean, look, being behind the podium and taking barbs from like Jim Acosta and others is challenging. I always tried to have grace under fire, because I was certainly under fire at the podium. But now my life, I get to be with my daughter. I go in, I'm with the 2 of the most amazing women I've ever met, Harris Faulkner and Emily Compagno. And we just get to, in a talk show format from 12 to 1 on Outnumbered, just talk about the issues of the day. And we genuinely like each other. It's not a show like The View where people are like arguing left and right. It's a show where we just really like love the issues, love each other. And it's so fun. Every time I walk onto that set, I'm like, is this real?
Kayleigh, people love listening to you, and they so respect you. How does the role of your faith in the Lord guide you, both in your personal life and especially in your political and your media life?
It's instrumental. I mean, I couldn't get through a day or an hour without it. For me, I think knowing, I grew up in the pews at my Southern Baptist church, and I went to an all-girls Catholic school, and faith was just kind of woven within me by my parents. And, when I went off to Washington, D.C., to Georgetown, to Oxford, over in the United Kingdom, then to Cambridge, and then to New York City. I mean, it's something that has always been, no matter what happens in my life, like a shut door, a low point, before I met my husband, a bad breakup, it was always this thing that kind of was my anchor. And it still is to this day, because, in the White House, there were low points, the president getting COVID-19, the murder of George Floyd, and kind of the really tense moment in our nation after that. There were really, really low points and hard issues to work through. But having my faith and my Jesus calling and having God speak to me through scripture and through prayer, it helped you get through those really difficult times in our moments in our nation's history and in my own personal life.
And you've talked about how your parents stressed the importance of having a worldview. And I know that's the lens through which you saw the death of George Floyd and you saw all of these important events happening. Can you just talk a little bit about that? What is actually a worldview, and why is it so important for us to have one?
Yeah, my dad always used to say growing up, like, everyone has a worldview. And I was like, what's this worldview thing? Like, he keeps talking about. And it really is the lens through which you see the world. And it crystallized for me, especially when I went overseas to Oxford. I was in a very liberal institution. I enjoyed my time there. I grew there. I credit, being able to argue in a way that is like intellectual and makes sense to my time at Oxford, because I really got to dig into kind of the art of argumentation. But, as I went there, I was surrounded by people with very different worldviews, very different viewpoints. And, for me, knowing that my viewpoint always funneled through the viewpoint of Jesus Christ, it really helped me to keep my principles, to stay firm. I know a lot of parents worry about their kids going off to college, but if you've put them in the church and put within them the worldview that I had and that I grew up with, you don't need to worry when they go off to college. Of course, keep an eye on them and check on them, but it really helps to keep you centered and grounded.
So Mike Huckabee called you a, quote, meticulous researcher who is extraordinarily prepared. And we see that when you're on TV. Van Jones, CNN commentator, says there's very few people in either party who can accomplish what Kayleigh has accomplished in such a short time. And we remember your binders with all of the tabs as press secretary. Why do you go to such lengths to be so prepared?
My mom says, and I don't remember this, but she said whenever I used to take you along the beach when you were a little girl, the turf would come in, the waves would come in, and then they'd go out, and like all the shells would go out with it. And she was like, you were this little kid. I'd never seen anything like it, that you just had to pick up all the shells, and you were frantic at the thought of not picking up all the shells. I think from a very young age, I always was a overachiever, over-preparer. Like if I know that Jim Acosta is going to ask me a question, I want the answer times 10 with footnotes times 20 so that, I'm over-prepared and I put in that hard work. And, I'm glad it was noticed by some amazing colleagues and men of faith like Van Jones and Governor Mike Huckabee. But I'll tell you, Governor Mike Huckabee, one thing he taught me, and I was so honored to learn from him for 3 years, is, you come in with all the facts. That's great. But you need to be able to communicate with the American people, look into the camera and communicate with them in a way that's understandable and clear and relatable. And that's something Governor Huckabee, he has. And for 3 years, I got to learn that from him, which really helped.
You also said that while you were an intern at Fox News, you learned the lesson that opportunities don't find you, you must find them. Why is that so important?
It's very important because getting the job is just step number one. I mean, I came in as an intern at Fox and, you're given responsibilities. But, to me, I thought, how can I make the life easier of the person whom I'm working for? And rather than, saying, hey, let me do more, I just said, let me show what I can do. And, one day I said to my producer, I didn't say rather, I just wrote the opening script. I was working on Hannity and Combs. That was Sean Hannity's former show. And, I put the script on his desk and he came to me, he said, this is pretty good. And I kept doing it day after day. And then he said, why don't you take a crack at writing the script each and every day? And then he let me go into the editing bay and edit the opening script and all the images for the opening script. So, I say getting the job is just the first step, because the second step is proving that you can handle the job and excel and exceed. And it's taking that one further step, making your boss's life a little easier, that I think goes the extra mile, is noticed, and ultimately advances you.
That's so great. And I know that you're a role model for so many young aspiring journalists, politicians. What advice would you give to them so that they've got a shot at really being successful?
Well, thank you for that. That's kind. But, I would say, don't get lost in the noise, Kirk, because it can be tough for any politician, any media personality, anyone in any job, really. It's certainly one that's under scrutiny. When you look at the headlines and you look at what the media is saying about you, and you look at the natural attacks that are going to come your way, I think it deters a lot of really good public servants from public service, knowing what will be done to them and their families. And that's a shame. And I've seen it done to person time and time again. So, I think drown out the noise and know the only thing that matters is what that guy thinks of you upstairs, Jesus Christ. Whatever CNN, whomever says about you, that's just noise. But if you are working in the service of the Lord, you're achieving that end and you're changing lives, and you'll be rewarded with many crowns in the end.
I love it. Would you even say that maybe no matter how many people are against you, if you are with the Lord, you're never outnumbered?
Yes. I think that's very well said.
That's right. And I need to live for an audience of one. That's my way of putting it.
Yes.
Most people know you as a former press secretary during the Trump administration. Tell us, how did you learn how to deal with the barrage of negative stories and the slanted news stories, not only about Trump and the administration, but about conservatives and Republicans in general? Was that hard?
Yeah, it was extremely difficult. I mean, it still is to this day, especially as we learn that, when I was at the podium saying, no, protesters were not pummeled and gassed so that President Trump could take a photo at St. John's Church with the Bible. That didn't happen. And now we know the Department of Interior confirmed that did not happen. You know, I stood at the podium and said, no, there were not bounties on the head of American soldiers, Russian bounties in Afghanistan. And now that is proven false. So, you know, I was correct in saying that that was not true. Even the Biden intel community has confirmed that. So especially now in the aftermath, when no one covers the cleanup, no one covers the change in the storyline. But I think ultimately what it came down to was this. Oftentimes I look past the reporters and at the camera. There's a camera in the back of the briefing room and spoke directly to the American people. And the one thing I have faith in and confidence in, and I know, is the American people are smart. The American people are wise. The Edelman Trust Barometer came out, and there's I think it's somewhere 70%, right around there, of the American public that believes that the media makes up stories to serve an agenda. And so I think the American people, I have great confidence in. They see through kind of the noise, and it makes it easier for me to kind of block out the noise, knowing that there are people that see my heart, the heart of the Trump administration, what we were trying to do with all of the things the former president accomplished.
I think you're right, and I think people can tell that you're shooting straight with them. Kayleigh, you wrote a book for such a time as this, where you're talking about your faith journey through your career, and you talk about how your predecessor, Sarah Huckabee, would read a devotional before every press briefing. And you continued that tradition. In fact, you've written a devotional of your own. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Sarah, you know, she texted me a list of advice on the day of my first press briefing, and the final piece of advice was to pray and to trust in God. And she told me that she read her Jesus Calling before every press briefing. So I carried on the tradition. I read my Jesus Calling, and on that day of my first press briefing, May 1st, 2020, Sarah texted me her Jesus Calling book from May 1st, 2018. So exactly 2 years prior. And it basically said that God has designed this for you, a purpose, and you're here for a reason, and not to worry. But on the day of my first press briefing, I can tell you, Kirk, I worried quite a bit. You know, I had tweeted out Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Yeah. I prayed, but nevertheless, I was at 2 p.m. I'm supposed to be at the podium, but instead I was in my office crying. And my assistant came to me, you can't be crying right now. You've got to be at the podium. And she put my parents on speakerphone, and we prayed out loud together. And then I went to the West Wing bathroom and got on my knees and prayed for confidence and courage. And when I got to the podium, I had total and complete serenity. And it was not because of anything I had done. Yes, it's like I had been there my whole life. It was because I know Christians prayed across the country for our administration, and I felt it. And I felt total peace because it was Christ in me and Christ there beside me. I mean, I felt like I had been there forever. It was from crying to the podium.
Kayleigh, you know, working as a Christian in the news media, a lot of people feel like they've got to walk on eggshells and they've got to not offend people when they're trying to be light in a dark place for fear that they might get fired or that they get mocked. Do you feel that way? Or do you charge in there feeling like, no, God is with me and greater is he who is in me than he who's in the world?
Yeah, the latter. I mean, I walk in and I'm very upfront about what I believe, that I believe in the Bible and biblical truth, that I believe Jesus Christ is Savior, that I believe that Jesus Christ is the way to heaven. I mean, these are my beliefs I've had my entire life. And, you know, I'm not afraid to say them, but I understand the feeling. You know, I understand where now, you know, we're covering the story at Fox and in Finland, a woman who's just tweeting out the Bible, like literally the Bible. And
right, I saw
basically is being prosecuted in a court of law. And then like here in our own country, First Liberty, they're a great organization that works on religious freedom. They are representing a guy named Coach Kennedy, who all he did, and this has been going on for years, this case, is literally bow down and silently fold his hands and not say anything, but just silently pray to God after a football game, and he's fired from his job. And thankfully, the Supreme Court finally is taking up that case, thanks, I would argue, to Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, and Neil Gorsuch, all Trump appointees who are changing the makeup of the court. So I understand feeling that way as a Christian, but we got to be bold. You know, the antidote to darkness is light, and the antidote to a really grim future is filling the world with a lot of Christian babies who can bring that light to the world.
I think so many conservatives look at mainstream media today and they see an agenda and a bias behind so many things, so many stories that they see, and individuals who are trying to push that. And as ambassadors from heaven, as Christians who have a message of grace that we want to get out to the world and we want the world to be reconciled to God, do you feel sort of like this covert ambassador from heaven? Or do you feel like, no, I'm just Kayleigh doing my job. This is what I believe, and I don't have an agenda? Or is it okay to say, no, we actually do, and it's a good agenda?
You know, we as Christians, one of the keys is when we share our points, to do so with gentleness, and to do so with love and with compassion. You know, I don't agree with all of the political rhetoric out there. I don't like a lot of the political rhetoric out there. It gets too caustic. I don't like how hostile it really feels right now, between the left and the right, because ultimately, whether on the left or the right, there's something that's so much more important, and it's Christ. And if we as Christians can bring gentleness to with our message, as Alan Combs said to me, don't fight fire with fire, fight fire with water. I think that's wise advice. And if we can communicate the truth with a gentle heart, it'll go a long way.
I know that working on the Huckabee Show was really helpful for you. It was influential for you. And he was a bit of a mentor when you were there. Do you feel that now, that in the position that you're in, that you have a chance to sort of pay that forward for aspiring politicians, aspiring people who want to come into the media, and give them a hand up and give them some advice?
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, Governor Huckabee was so wonderful to me. And you talk about God-ordained paths. I mean, you know, I'm on the Huckabee Show, and Sarah Sanders is running around the green room, you know, the time she would come. You know, she was a young woman out in politics, and I was just a producer on a show. And to think that there were 2 press secretaries there in that green room of the Mike Huckabee Show, it's just funny. And it just shows how God works. So yes, no doubt about it. I think paying it forward, the time that Governor Huckabee took with me, the great advice he gave me, the wise counsel, paying that forward is no doubt a big part of paving a generation of hopefully future reporters. We need more reporters who are going to ask tough questions, who are going to be driven by truth. And to the degree I can inspire people to go into media, politics, and reporting, I certainly will do so.
Well, I'm so glad that you feel that way. I'm so glad that you've taken the bold step into this arena that many people of faith don't want to go into. You know, we often don't think of our kids. We want them to grow up and love God and make a difference. And so we think of, well, maybe you could be a missionary, or you'll be a pastor, or you'll do something like this. But lawyers and politicians or actors in Hollywood, I mean, you'll for sure lose your faith. But where else do we need people of strong faith and conviction with a biblical worldview? Because these are the places that shape the world that we live in. So I'm so personally thankful for your commitment and what you're doing. I think a lot of us want to know. We see someone like you and we say, wait a minute, you're in media, you're in politics. Is she ever going to run for office?
It's a question I'm asked often. And I mean, just what I'll say is, it's quite a path when you run for office. I mean, your family gets attacked with baseless. I saw what happened to Governor Huckabee. They attacked his family, and he's got the best family in the world. My family is much like his. You know, it's a brutal world out there. If I ever felt strongly called by God, of course, but I'd have to feel a very strong calling, because I will say I love life at Fox. I get to see my daughter. I get to enjoy life. But if I ever felt a strong calling from God, of course, I'm going to follow his path for my life. So, you know, who knows? We'll see.
I love that answer. And God has got each of us where we're supposed to be on the stage of the world, playing the role that he's written for us. And we just need to be faithful there. And you're being faithful where you are. And I'm trying to do the same. So, sister, keep up the great work.
For such a time as this. Thank you. It puts us all here for such a time as this.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It's fascinating to see how God is strategically positioning the people in the media for such a time as this.